On a freezing Christmas day in Philadelphia, a struggling yet resilient black woman steps into a church, whispering a quiet prayer, not for herself, but for those who have even less. As she leaves, she notices an elderly man sitting alone on a snow-covered bench, his thin coat offering little protection against the biting cold, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Acting on instinct, she spends her last few dollars to offer him warmth, a cup of tea, a scarf, a moment of kindness. What she doesn't know is that this simple act will set off a chain of events that will change her life forever. As the afternoon light dimmed, snowflakes drifted down in silent waves, blanketing the worn stone steps of St. Vincent Church in a thin layer of white. And now, on Christmas afternoon, she had nothing to celebrate. The old wooden doors groaned softly as Nia Carter stepped inside, just as the distant chime of the church bells echoed through the crisp winter air. Her breath curled into a misty swirl, fading as warmth enveloped her. The scent of melted candle wax and aged wood mixed with a faint trace of evergreen, remnants of a Christmas Eve mass long past. She pulled her coat tighter around her frame, though it did little to keep out the biting December cold. It had been an especially bitter winter, not just in temperature but in circumstance. Her stomach clenched, not from hunger, though that too was a constant companion, but from the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. At 29, she should have been building a future, but instead she was simply trying to survive. Once, she had a stable job at one of the city's largest firms, working tirelessly in administration. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. At least until she spoke up about how the company squeezed every last drop from its employees, how the black and brown workers were passed over for promotions, how the bosses took advantage of desperation. She thought doing the right thing mattered. Instead, she was swiftly let go, replaced without hesitation. The message was clear: stay silent or be discarded. With no severance, no safety net, and no connections, she had spent the last 6 months piecing together an existence. She babysat when she could, scrubbed dishes in the back of a grimy diner, picked up odd freelance writing jobs, anything to keep the lights on. But it was never enough. Every dollar stretched thin, every bill a battle. And now, on Christmas afternoon, she had nothing to celebrate. She had no gifts to give, no feast to look forward to, just another day of trying to make ends meet. But even with her own struggles, she refused to let bitterness take root. That was why she was here, why she knelt in the dim glow of flickering candles, fingers clasped together in quiet prayer. She didn't ask for miracles, she didn't pray for money or success. Instead, she whispered a plea for others, for those who were struggling just as she was, for those who had even less. Let them find warmth today, let them find kindness. Her words were barely audible, but they carried the weight of sincerity. When she finally stood, she exhaled slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She had nowhere in particular to be, no grand plans. Maybe she'd return home and try to knock out a few articles for a meager paycheck. Maybe she'd take a walk through the city, letting the holiday lights distract her from the emptiness gnawing at her ribs. As she stepped out of the church, the sharp wind bit at her cheeks, sending a shiver down her spine. From somewhere down the block, the sweet, smoky scent of roasting chestnuts drifted through the air, mingling with the distant laughter of children bundled in scarves and mittens. Through the glowing windows of nearby townhouses, she glimpsed silhouettes of families gathered around dinner tables, their voices a warm hum against the winter silence. She was about to head down the sidewalk when something made her pause. Across the street, past a vendor wrapping up his stall where the scent of caramelized nuts still lingered, sat an old man. A dusting of snow had settled over the park bench where he sat, hunched against the cold. The weak glow of the setting sun barely reached him, casting long, lonely shadows on the frozen pavement. His coat, thin and worn, offered little protection against the bitter wind that cut through the air like a blade. His shoulders trembled slightly, but he remained still, his head bowed as if weighed down by something heavier than just the cold. Nia hesitated. She had seen plenty of people in need before. It was an unfortunate reality in a city that left its most vulnerable behind. But something about this man, something about the stillness in his posture, the sheer depth of sorrow etched into his weathered face, compelled her to move. She crossed the street, her boots crunching against the ice, her breath steadying. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Are you all right?" The man stirred slightly, lifting his head. His eyes, clouded with age but still sharp, met hers. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then a tired smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're kind to ask," he murmured. His voice was deep, rich with experience, but lined with something fragile. "But I'm all right." She didn't believe him. "You look cold," she said, glancing at his coat. It was barely better than wearing a sweater. He chuckled softly, a hollow sound. "Cold isn't the worst thing in the world." She frowned, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. "Would you like some help? Maybe a warm drink?" The man hesitated. Then finally he sighed. "I appreciate it, truly, but I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," she assured him. "It's Christmas. No one should be alone on Christmas." He exhaled sharply, his breath misting in the frigid air. His fingers, knotted with age, clutched his lap. "I lost my wife 3 months ago," he admitted, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. "After 35 years together, first Christmas without her, and I don't know what to do with myself. So I don't want to go back to my empty house. Everyone has relatives waiting for them, but I have nowhere to go. Sitting here feeling the cold of winter isn't so bad." The words settled heavily between them. Nia felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had lost things, yes, her job, her sense of security, but this was different. This was the kind of loss that hollowed out a person. She didn't know what to say. No words could erase his pain. So instead she simply said, "I'm sorry." He nodded, blinking rapidly as if to clear away the weight of the moment. "Thank you, dear, but there's nothing to be done." She watched him, her mind racing. She had so little herself. But this wasn't about money, wasn't about resources. It was about human connection, and she had that to give. "Stay here," she said suddenly, standing. The old man blinked. "What?" "Just wait here," she repeated, already turning toward the nearest shop. She didn't have much left in her wallet, but she didn't need much. Sometimes kindness was enough. Nia's steps were quick, purposeful, as she pushed open the glass door of a small corner store. A bell chimed overhead, the warm air inside a stark contrast to the icy chill of the street. The place was nearly empty, save for an older woman behind the register, humming along to a Christmas tune playing softly from a dusty radio. She moved swiftly through the narrow aisles, scanning shelves with a critical eye. She didn't have much, barely anything really. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that an old man sat outside in the freezing cold, grieving a loss that no one should have to endure alone, least of all today. Her fingers closed around a disposable cup, filling it at the self-serve station with hot, fragrant tea. Coffee might have been a stronger choice, but tea had a way of soothing wounds that weren't visible. She grabbed a small bag of pastries, something simple but filling, and as she turned toward the register, her gaze landed on a small rack of knitted scarves. The tag on the cheapest one made her stomach clench. $12. It wasn't much, but for her it was everything. She hesitated. The money in her pocket was meant to last the rest of the week. There was no safety net, no one to call if she ran out, and yet, as she stood there, images flashed through her mind. The man's trembling hands, the thinness of his coat, the way his voice cracked when he spoke of his wife. Nia grabbed the scarf. At the register, she handed over the last of her cash, the bills crumpled and soft from being folded too many times. The cashier gave her a kind but knowing look. "Treating someone special today?" She swallowed, something like that. As she stepped back into the cold evening air, the warmth of the shop evaporated instantly, replaced by the biting chill of winter. Somewhere in the distance, a street performer played a slow, melancholy tune on a saxophone, his notes drifting through the night like echoes of forgotten stories. The aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery teased her empty stomach, but she ignored it. Hunger was nothing new. What mattered now was the old man, still waiting on that snow-covered bench. As she stepped back into the cold evening air, her breath hitched slightly in her chest, but she pushed the worry aside. She could go a little hungry. She had been hungry before. What mattered now was the man still sitting alone on that bench, watching the snow gather at his feet as if he had no reason left to move. He hadn't left. Relief washed over her as she hurried back across the street. He lifted his head at the sound of her footsteps, his tired eyes widening slightly as she approached, hands full. "You came back," he murmured. There was something in his voice, disbelief perhaps, or maybe something deeper. "I told you I would." She offered him the steaming cup first, and for a moment he simply stared at it. Then, slowly, as if he wasn't sure it was real, he took it from her, his fingers wrapping around it like it was the only source of warmth in the world. She set the pastry bag beside him and then, without hesitation, unwrapped the scarf, shaking it loose before draping it gently over his lap. "And this is for you," she said, her voice soft. "I figured you could use something warmer." The old man's hands stilled, his gaze dropping to the fabric, his lips parted, but no words came. Instead, a tremor passed through his shoulders, something almost imperceptible, but Nia saw it. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a shaky breath, he lifted the scarf, running his fingers over the wool as if he had forgotten what kindness felt like. "No one's done something like this for me in a long time," he admitted finally, voice thick with something unspoken. "I don't even know your name." "Nyaya," she said simply. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Samuel." The name sat between them for a moment, heavy with significance. Samuel cleared his throat, his eyes glistening as he looked at her. Why? She knew what he was asking. Why waste kindness on a stranger? Why spend money she clearly didn't have? Nia shrugged, offering him a small but genuine smile. "Because no one should be alone on Christmas." Samuel held her gaze for a long moment, and then something almost imperceptible shifted. His posture eased, the rigid tension in his shoulders loosening just slightly. He picked up the cup again, cradling it in both hands, and took a slow sip. A quiet sigh escaped him, and in that moment Nia realized something. The cold wasn't the worst thing in the world. Loneliness was. And today, at least, neither of them had to face it alone. The walk back to Nia's apartment was quiet, the city hushed under the weight of snowfall and the encroaching night. Samuel clutched the scarf around his neck, his hands still wrapped around the cup of tea, the warmth seeping into his fingers. He walked slowly, carefully, his steps deliberate, but there was something lighter in the way he carried himself now, as if the simple act of being invited somewhere had lifted a weight he hadn't realized was pressing down on him. Nia led him up the worn steps of her building, the cold metal railing biting at her palm as she pulled open the heavy front door. The hallway smelled of old wood and faint traces of someone's attempt at baking. The heating wasn't great, but it was enough to take the edge off the winter air. "Apologies in advance," she said as she unlocked her door. "It's not much." She pushed it open, revealing a small but meticulously kept space. A modest couch sat against one wall, a scuffed coffee table in front of it. The kitchen, barely separated from the living area, had a tiny round table with two mismatched chairs, but despite its simplicity, the apartment had a warmth to it. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, the multicolored lights blinking unevenly, its few ornaments slightly worn but lovingly placed. It was clear that, despite everything, she had tried to make this space feel like home. Samuel hesitated at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room. Something flickered in his expression, an emotion he quickly masked before stepping inside. "Make yourself comfortable," Nia said, slipping off her coat and hanging it on a hook by the door. "I'll get us something to eat. It won't be fancy, but it'll be warm." Samuel gave a small nod and lowered himself into the armchair beside the Christmas tree, his fingers still curled around the teacup. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft crackle of a candle burning on the windowsill. He exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting, landing on a pile of papers stacked on the side table. He hesitated before reaching for them. The top envelope bore the unmistakable red ink of urgency. Past due. He thumbed through the others. Electricity, rent, water. Each one stamped with notices that told a silent story of struggle. His grip on the papers tightened slightly. In the kitchen, Nia moved efficiently, pulling out the last of what she had: a can of tomato soup, a small loaf of bread, and a container of leftover sweet potato casserole. She worked quickly, heating the soup, slicing the bread into careful portions. It wasn't much, but it would be enough. When she turned back toward the living room, she caught the way Samuel's expression had changed. He was staring down at the bills, his face unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice quieter than before, he asked, "You're struggling, aren't you?" Nia stilled. Her fingers tightened slightly around the bowl she was holding. She had never liked admitting it out loud. There was a strange kind of shame in it, in not being able to hold everything together the way she wanted to, but there was no point in lying. She let out a breath, forcing a small smile. "It's just a rough patch. I'll be fine." Samuel studied her, his gaze heavy with something unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. But there was something thoughtful in the way he leaned back, his fingers tapping gently against the worn fabric of the chair. As Nia set the food down on the table, he spoke again, his voice slow, deliberate. "You remind me of someone," he said. She glanced at him. "Yeah?" He nodded, his gaze distant. "My wife. She never liked asking for help either." His lips curled slightly, a wistful sort of smile. "Stubborn as hell." Nia huffed a quiet laugh, sinking into the seat across from him. "Sounds familiar." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a voice filled with quiet certainty, he said, "You know, sometimes help comes from places you least expect." Something about the way he said it made the air shift. Nia met his gaze, searching for something in his expression, but he only smiled, picking up his spoon. She didn't know what he meant, not yet. But something told her she would soon. The night stretched on, the low hum of the city muffled by the thick blanket of snow outside. Nia and Samuel sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, their meal finished but neither quite ready to move. The warmth of the soup still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of cinnamon from a candle burning in the corner. Samuel shifted slightly, glancing once more at the stack of bills beside him. His fingers traced the edge of an envelope, his brow furrowing. "How long has it been like this?" he asked, his voice careful, measured. Nia exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. She knew what he was asking. She had seen the way he looked at those past due notices, the way his expression had darkened ever so slightly. "A while," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I've been making it work, picking up whatever jobs I can, but rent's late, utilities are overdue, and I'm running out of options." She tried to keep her tone light, but there was no hiding the exhaustion woven into her words. "I don't like thinking about it too much. I just take it one day at a time." Samuel nodded, his expression unreadable. He tapped a finger lightly against the table, lost in thought. "And the company that fired you," he said after a moment. "They still owe you money, don't they?" Nia stiffened. She wasn't expecting that. Most people didn't ask about that part, not really. They either pitied her or told her to move on, as if the injustice of it wasn't something that kept her awake at night. She hesitated before answering. "Yeah," she said finally. "They never paid me my last wages, claimed I violated some policy when I spoke up about how they treated people like me." A bitter smile tugged at her lips. "And let's be real, someone like me trying to take legal action against a company like that? I'd be buried before I even got started." Silence settled between them. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking each second as something unspoken passed between them. Then Samuel leaned forward, folding his hands on the table, his eyes, tired but sharp, carrying something deeper than mere sympathy, locked onto hers. "Nia," he said, his voice steady, deliberate, "what if I told you that wasn't true?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulling out something small, neatly folded. He placed it on the table between them, sliding it forward until it rested near her fingertips. Curious, Nia picked it up, unfolding it carefully. Her breath hitched. It was a business card. Samuel Whitmore, senior partner, Whitmore and Reynolds Law Firm. Her stomach dropped. She looked back at him, eyes wide, but he only smiled. calm, knowing, as if he had expected this reaction. "I didn't lie to you," he said gently. "I told you I lost my wife. I told you I don't have family left. But what I didn't tell you is that I spent 40 years fighting for people like you. People who thought they didn't stand a chance against companies like the one that wronged you." Nia's hands tightened around the card. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. "You did something tonight that most people wouldn't have. You gave when you had nothing to spare, and that," he said, voice firm, "is exactly why I'm going to make sure you get what's rightfully yours." Her throat tightened. Samuel, I didn't help you for—" "I know," he cut in, his tone gentle but unwavering. "That's why you deserve it." Nia stared at him, emotions swelling in her chest, tangled and overwhelming. For months she had fought alone. For months she had convinced herself there was no justice waiting for her, no chance of winning against the kind of power her former employers wielded. And yet, sitting across from her was a man who had spent his life proving otherwise. The weight of the moment settled deep in her bones. For the first time in a long time she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The days that followed passed in a blur, a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and legal consultations that Nia never could have imagined being a part of. Samuel had wasted no time. By the morning after Christmas, his law firm had already begun drafting the case against her former employer. Documents that Nia had never seen, emails, internal policies, records of past complaints, surfaced like buried evidence in a long overdue trial. At first, she had been hesitant. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life, one where justice wasn't just a fantasy reserved for the powerful. But Samuel was relentless, not just in his expertise, but in the quiet, unwavering belief that this fight was worth it. And so Nia fought. The battle stretched over months. The company, predictably, tried to dismiss her claims, tried to paint her as an ungrateful employee, a troublemaker, a woman who should have just known her place. But Samuel and his legal team tore through their arguments with a precision honed over decades. Every lie was unraveled, every false accusation met with hard evidence. By the time they reached the final hearing, the company was no longer arguing their innocence. They were scrambling for damage control. And then, one crisp afternoon, Nia sat in a courtroom as the judge ruled in her favor. Her employer was ordered to pay her every cent they had withheld, along with damages for wrongful termination. The sum was staggering, enough to not only pull her out of debt, but to give her something she hadn't dared to hope for: a second chance. When she stepped outside, the winter air sharp in her lungs, Samuel was waiting. His scarf was wrapped tightly around his neck, the same one she had given him that Christmas night. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "How do you feel?" Nia exhaled, watching her breath curl into the air. "Lighter," she admitted. "Like I can finally breathe again." Samuel nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. "Good." He tucked his hands into his coat pockets, his expression shifting slightly. "And what will you do now?" For the first time in a long time, she didn't answer immediately. There was no urgency pressing down on her, no desperation clawing at her chest. She had options now. She had power. She smiled, slow and certain. "I think I'll start something of my own," she said. Samuel arched a brow. "Something that helps people like me," she continued, her voice steadier now, "people who think they don't have a chance." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that." She laughed, shaking her head. "You always knew, didn't you?" He simply shrugged. "I've been doing this a long time, Nia." They stood there for a moment, the weight of everything they had fought for settling between them, no longer a burden but something else entirely, something that felt a lot like victory. Nia turned her face toward the sky, feeling the cold kiss of snowflakes against her skin. A few months ago she had prayed for kindness in the world, never expecting that her own would be returned in ways she couldn't have imagined. Now, as she stood there, the past behind her and the future wide open before her, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change everything. As the months passed, Nia found herself meeting with Samuel more often. not just as a mentor but as something far more meaningful. Their bond, formed that cold Christmas night, had deepened into something neither of them had expected. He had no children, and she had spent most of her life fighting her battles alone, but somewhere along the way they had become family. One evening, as they sat in his office, the city lights flickering outside the towering windows, Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm but purposeful. "You have too much talent to let it go to waste. You've fought for yourself, for what's right, and not many people have that kind of strength." Nia tilted her head, curious. "Where are you going with this?" He slid a folder across the desk. "There's an opening at a legal aid firm I trust. They advocate for workers who've been exploited, people who've been silenced just like you were. They need someone who understands that struggle, not just in theory, but in experience." She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the folder. "Samuel, I don't have a legal background. I wouldn't even know where to start." He smiled, shaking his head. "You don't need to be a lawyer to fight for people, Nia. You need heart, persistence, and the willingness to stand up when no one else will. And from what I've seen, you have all of that and more." Her throat tightened. She had spent so long scraping by, never daring to imagine something more for herself, but now, sitting across from the man who had once been a stranger, she realized he believed in her more than she had ever believed in herself. "You remind me of her," he said softly, almost to himself. She looked up. "Your wife?" He nodded, his gaze distant but warm. "She fought for people, too. She would have liked you, Nia. In fact, I think she would have seen you as the daughter we never had." A lump formed in her throat. Nia had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself, trying to carve out a place where she belonged, and now, for the first time, she wasn't just being offered a job, she was being offered a future. A home. A family. Swallowing hard, she reached for the folder and met his gaze. "Tell me more about the job." Samuel's smile was knowing, proud. "I thought you might say that." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.